Imagine being born into wealth and still living in a constant state of emotional emergency. Not stress, not mild anxiety, full volume, glass-shattering, whale-sized emotional collapse. This is not the story of a spoiled rich kid. This is the story of someone who wakes up every day already overwhelmed by the simple act of existing. Because Pearl doesn't have emotions. She is emotions, unfiltered, unregulated, weaponized. In a world where everyone else talks, she screams. Where others complain, she detonates. Where people feel awkward silence, she fills it with a shriek so loud it feels like the universe itself is asking her to calm down. And the cruel joke? She's not screaming because she's dramatic. She's screaming because nobody is listening. Pearl lives in a mansion, has access to unlimited money, and still behaves like someone trapped in a burning building that no one else can see. Every reaction is too big. Every disappointment is catastrophic. Every minor inconvenience feels like the end of her entire identity. That's the real horror here. Not that she overreacts, but that her world gives her nothing else to do. Because when you're raised in a place where emotions are treated as noise, the only way to be noticed is to be louder than reality itself. So when you hear Pearl screaming, crying, or spiraling into another emotional meltdown, understand this: that's not comedy. That's an alarm system. And the worst part? Everyone laughs. Because in SpongeBob SquarePants, emotional suffering is always funnier when it's loud. Pearl is technically a teenager. Biologically, socially, narratively, sure, that box is checked. Emotionally, she's a full-scale emergency response system. Every feeling she has arrives at maximum volume. There is no warm-up, no subtlety, no internal processing. Her emotions don't knock. They break the door down, flip the table, and demand immediate attention from everyone in the room. Most teenagers feel misunderstood. Pearl sounds like she's being actively attacked by reality. She doesn't sigh when she's annoyed. She shrieks. She doesn't get sad. She collapses. She doesn't feel embarrassed. She experiences social annihilation. And the joke, the one the show keeps repeating, is that this is treated as her personality, as if Pearl simply chose to exist in a constant state of emotional combustion. But look closer, and it becomes painfully clear. Pearl isn't dramatic. She's overstimulated. Her world offers zero emotional regulation tools, no guidance, no validation, no one saying, "Hey, this feeling will pass." Instead, every reaction is met with either indifference or annoyance, so the volume keeps rising, because if quiet didn't work, maybe deafening will. Pearl's screaming isn't random, it's escalation. She is what happens when feelings are ignored long enough to turn feral. That's why her presence feels exhausting, even to the audience. She's not written to be comforting, she's written to be overwhelming, an auditory manifestation of adolescent panic that no one asked for, but everyone remembers. And deep down, that's what makes her funny, because Pearl behaves exactly like emotions felt at 16. Too big, too fast, too intense, and deeply inconvenient for everyone else. The laughter doesn't come from mockery. It comes from recognition. We laugh because we survived this phase. She didn't. And the tragedy is that her emotional fire alarm keeps screaming in a house where no one ever plans to put out the fire. On paper, Pearl should be fine. More than fine, actually. She is the daughter of one of the richest beings in Bikini Bottom, a man who treats money like oxygen and counts coins the way others count their blessings. A father who can buy literally anything except emotional safety. Because being raised by Mr. Krabs means growing up in a house where love is measured in purchases, not presents. When Pearl is upset, she doesn't get comfort. She gets compensation, a shopping spree instead of a conversation, a credit card instead of eye contact, a party instead of understanding. And to Mr. Krabs, this makes perfect sense. In his mind, money fixes problems. Money replaces effort. Money is affection, neatly folded and handed over with a receipt. But Pearl doesn't want pearls. She wants to be seen. That's the core tragedy of her existence. She lives with a parent who can afford everything except emotional availability. Her father isn't cruel in the traditional sense. He's worse. He's practically absent while being physically present. He's always there and never listening. So Pearl grows louder, more expressive, more explosive, because subtlety dies quickly in a household where attention has to be earned like a bonus. Her screaming isn't rebellion, it's negotiation. If I am loud enough, her behavior seems to say, maybe I'll matter. And sometimes it works. She gets gifts. Big ones, loud ones, shiny distractions designed to silence the problem instead of solving it, which teaches her a brutal lesson early on. Your feelings are inconvenient, your pain is negotiable, and your value increases when you stop being quiet. So she escalates again and again and again. Pearl doesn't melt down because she's spoiled. She's melting down because she's been trained to equate emotional expression with transactions. And that's what makes it funny in the darkest possible way, because the audience laughs at the screaming whale girl while completely missing the fact that she's screaming in a house filled with money and absolutely no warmth. From the outside, Pearl's life looks like the solution to everyone else's problems. She lives in a massive house. She never worries about money. Her biggest inconveniences are social embarrassment and emotional collapse. So why does she look like someone permanently 5 seconds away from a breakdown? Because comfort is not the same thing as stability. Pearl is surrounded by luxury, but luxury doesn't regulate emotions. It doesn't explain why you feel empty, or why every social interaction feels like a test you didn't study for. It just makes your sadness more expensive and your panic more visible. She has everything, and still nothing that actually helps. Her room is filled with stuff, yet she's constantly bored. Her closet is full, yet she hates everything she wears. Her life is safe, yet she's always on edge. That's the paradox of Pearl Krabs. The more she has, the worse she feels for feeling bad at all. Because misery with privilege comes with an extra layer of guilt. She's not just unhappy, she's ashamed of being unhappy. Every emotional breakdown carries the unspoken accusation, you have no reason to feel like this. And nothing intensifies suffering faster than being told your pain is illegitimate. So she overcompensates. She throws bigger parties. She demands louder validation. She chases trends, popularity, approval, anything that might justify her existence in a world that keeps insisting she should already be satisfied. But satisfaction never arrives. Because money can distract you from pain, but it cannot tell you who you are. And Pearl desperately wants an identity that isn't rich guy's loud daughter. She wants to matter on her own terms. She wants to be liked, not tolerated. She wants to be wanted without being bought. Instead, she exists in a constant performance, always trying, always failing, always spiraling the moment the applause stops. That's why her breakdowns feel so dramatic. They're not reactions, they're corrections. She's trying to fill an emotional void with noise because silence would force her to confront the terrifying idea that even with everything, she still feels wrong. And that's the cruel irony we laugh at. Pearl isn't miserable despite being rich. She's miserable because wealth convinced everyone around her that she no longer needs anything else. For Pearl, adolescence isn't awkward. It's apocalyptic. Every school day feels like a test where the questions keep changing and the punishment for failure is public humiliation. Every hallway is a battlefield. Every glance is a verdict. Every laugh might be about her, and that possibility alone is enough to trigger a full emotional collapse. This isn't teen drama. This is survival horror, because adolescence already turns small problems into existential threats. Now imagine going through that phase as a giant whale girl whose emotions echo through buildings. There is no hiding, no blending in, no "I'll just keep my head down." Pearl's existence is loud before she even speaks. So when rejection happens, and it always does, it hits harder. A bad hair day isn't just a bad day, it's proof she'll never be accepted. A missed invitation isn't an oversight, it's confirmation that she's unlovable. A single awkward moment becomes a permanent stain on her identity. Her brain doesn't de-escalate, it catastrophizes. And no one ever teaches her how not to. Instead of guidance, she gets dismissal. Instead of reassurance, she gets eye rolls. The message is clear and consistent. Calm down, which is maybe the least useful instruction you can give to someone whose nervous system is already on fire. So the fear compounds. Fear of being judged, fear of being alone, fear of being too much. Fear of never being enough. Pearl lives in a constant state of emotional anticipation, waiting for the next embarrassment, the next rejection, the next moment that confirms her worst assumptions about herself. And when it happens, she explodes. Not because she's weak, but because she's exhausted. Her breakdowns aren't overreactions, they're what happens when every day feels like you're being chased by an invisible monster called everyone else's expectations. That's why watching her hurts, just a little, because beneath the screaming and chaos is a painfully accurate portrait of adolescence. A time when your emotions are real, your fears are valid, and absolutely no one takes you seriously. Pearl isn't dramatic, she's trapped in a horror movie where the villain is growing up. And the scariest part? There's no escape sequence. Just the promise that tomorrow she has to do it all again. Pearl's pain is designed to be funny. That's the trick. Her screams are timed for punchlines. Her breakdowns are framed as interruptions. Her emotional collapses exist to reset the scene, restore the joke, and move on like nothing meaningful just happened. The audience laughs because the suffering is loud, and loud pain is easier to dismiss. If Pearl were quiet, she wouldn't be comedy. She'd be uncomfortable. So the show turns her anguish into noise, something exaggerated enough to feel fictional, safe enough to enjoy. A spectacle instead of a signal, a bit instead of a breakdown. And it works. We laugh at how extra she is, at how quickly she spirals, at how absurdly intense her reactions are. But Pearl isn't laughing. She's the only one in the room experiencing consequences. Every joke costs her something: dignity, stability, a little more emotional trust in the world around her, and no one ever checks in after the punchline lands. That's what makes her role especially cruel. Pearl's suffering doesn't resolve, it resets. She doesn't learn, she doesn't heal, she just comes back next episode equally distressed, equally unheard, ready to perform her pain again for the audience's amusement. She is trapped in an endless loop of emotional slapstick. The louder she gets, the funnier it is. The funnier it is, the less seriously she's taken. The less seriously she's taken, the louder she has to get. It's a perfect cycle, perfectly miserable. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The joke works because we recognize it. We've all seen someone fall apart and felt relief that it wasn't us. We've all laughed at exaggerated suffering because it created distance, because it turned real pain into something abstract and manageable. Pearl becomes a pressure valve for everyone else's anxiety. She screams so we don't have to. So when the audience laughs, it isn't because Pearl is ridiculous. It's because she's doing emotional labor for everyone watching. She absorbs the chaos. She carries the intensity. She breaks down so the world around her can stay light. And that's why the laughter feels just a little bit wrong. Because deep down we know, if her pain were quieter, we wouldn't be laughing at all. Because exaggeration creates distance. Pearl's emotions are dialed so far past reasonable that they stop feeling real. They become theatrical, performative, safe. The kind of pain you're allowed to enjoy because it's wrapped in volume and absurdity. If her suffering were subtle, it would demand empathy. So the show makes it explosive, and suddenly it becomes entertainment. We laugh because the reactions are disproportionate. We laugh because the screams are excessive. We laugh because the intensity feels cartoonish enough to excuse us from caring. But the mechanism is familiar. Pearl's breakdowns mirror something deeply human, the chaos of emotions before you learn how to manage them. That phase where everything feels urgent, personal, and permanent, but you don't yet have the language or tools to explain why. So instead, you react. You cry too hard. You get angry too fast. You feel embarrassed for days over things no one else remembers. Pearl is that phase of life made visible and louder than anyone is comfortable with. That's why we laugh, because we recognize it, but only from a safe distance, from the other side of survival, from adulthood, where we can say, "Wow, that was dramatic," without remembering how real it felt at the time. Her pain becomes comedy because time has dulled ours, and the show knows it. In SpongeBob SquarePants, suffering is rarely quiet. It's stretched, amplified, distorted until it stops feeling personal. Pearl fits perfectly into that logic. Her distress is exaggerated just enough to stay funny, just far enough from reality to avoid responsibility. But the laughter isn't cruelty, it's relief. We laugh because we're no longer trapped in that emotional intensity, because watching someone else spiral reminds us that we made it out, that the world didn't actually end when we thought it would. Pearl didn't get that closure. She's permanently stuck in the phase we escaped, screaming emotions we've learned to internalize, carrying the weight we now know how to distribute. So when she falls apart on screen, we laugh not because she deserves it, but because she's holding a mirror to a version of ourselves we're grateful to have left behind. And laughing is easier than admitting how close it still feels. At some point, Pearl stops being funny and starts being blamed. She's too loud, too emotional, too dramatic, too much. That's the label she carries, not just within the show, but in how the audience is trained to see her, as a problem, an obstacle, a walking headache that disrupts otherwise lighthearted scenes. But look at her environment for more than 5 seconds, and the picture changes. Pearl isn't reacting to nothing, she's reacting to everything, all at once, with no support system and no instruction manual. She lives in a world that dismisses her emotions as inconvenient noise, a household where feelings are solved with money instead of care, a social environment where popularity is currency and rejection feels like annihilation, and a narrative structure that resets her pain every episode, so no one ever has to deal with the aftermath. Of course she's unbearable. Anyone would be. Pearl doesn't lack maturity, she lacks containment. There is no space where her emotions are allowed to exist without becoming a joke, a nuisance, or a transaction. So they leak out everywhere, loudly, messily, constantly. Her behavior isn't a flaw, it's a symptom of being raised without emotional boundaries, a symptom of never being taken seriously, a symptom of existing in a world that tells you to calm down instead of asking why you're panicking. So she spirals, over and over again. And what's cruel is that the solution is painfully simple, but permanently unavailable. She doesn't need to grow up faster. She doesn't need to toughen up. She doesn't need to learn her lesson. She needs someone to listen before the screaming starts. That's why calling Pearl insufferable misses the point entirely. She isn't hard to tolerate because she's broken. She's hard to tolerate because she's honest, emotionally naked in a world that prefers its discomfort neatly hidden. Pearl expresses what everyone else suppresses, and suppression looks calm. Expression looks ugly. So the world chooses calm and calls it maturity. Pearl pays the price. Because in a universe where emotional restraint is treated as virtue, the person who feels too much becomes the villain, even when they're just asking not to be ignored. So what have we actually learned about Pearl Krabs? She isn't just a loud teenager. She isn't comic relief. She isn't a spoiled rich kid screaming for no reason. She's a character built to embody emotional overload in its rawest form. Pearl is what happens when feelings are too big for the world that's supposed to hold them, when money replaces care, when humor replaces empathy, when adolescence never resolves, it just loops. Her life is a constant state of panic dressed up as comedy. Every scream is a flare shot into the sky. Every breakdown is a request for understanding that gets translated into a joke instead. And somehow, that's what makes her perfect for SpongeBob SquarePants. Because this universe doesn't punish emotional neglect, it laughs at it. Pearl exists so others can stay stable. She absorbs the chaos. She carries the discomfort. She becomes the spectacle so no one else has to confront what unchecked emotions actually look like. She is rich, loud, privileged, and deeply unhappy. And that contradiction is the punchline. But maybe that's why she resonates more than we'd like to admit. Because beneath the absurdity is something painfully familiar. The memory of feeling everything at once, with no idea what to do about it, and no one willing to slow down long enough to help. We laugh at Pearl because she screams what we learned to swallow. And the truth is, her life doesn't suck because she's dramatic. It sucks because she lives in pure emotional exposure, with no relief, no growth, and no exit. So the next time Pearl starts screaming on screen, remember, that's not overreaction, that's survival. If you survived adolescence, you've already beaten Pearl. If you didn't, congratulations, you're still screaming internally. So tell me, which cartoon character do you think lives in the worst emotional nightmare? Leave a comment, like the video, subscribe if you enjoy laughing at fictional suffering way more than processing your own, because here, at least the pain comes with punchlines.